Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Reaction Show. My name is Andrew Velez. I'm here with my co-host Joel Dehls, and here we are honored to have, of course, Adam from FTN Fantasy, a
Shout
guest who's been on the show a couple times before. But starts of the week, we got to get our boy back up on the show. But we're here after Thursday night football, a game that was not so great until that fourth quarter, and now I was left feeling, was this one of the best Thursday night football games that we've gotten this year so far? That's how good I'm feeling. I'm also feeling good for other reasons. I have Christian Kirk, I have Michael Thomas on the same fantasy team, and that fourth quarter was just absolutely everything that I needed. But gentlemen, talk to me. How are we doing today?
Thankfully, I somehow managed to avoid almost everybody in tonight's game. I didn't play Alvin Kamara in any important leagues, Travis Etienne. I avoided everybody. I don't have basically anybody on this team, but the fact that I avoided the dreaded Thursday night go down by 50, I'm taking that W.
Must
Adam,
be
how you
nice.
feeling today, man?
Must be nice. Went against Kamara and ETN in the same league that I also had Olave, so I got to watch him just not catch 15 targets and catch half of them, and just it was fun. But still, I still have it'd be worse if my team had no shot. I'm still projected to be really close, but overall, just I can't fathom. I'm sure we'll talk about it. I can't fathom having Chris Olave, Alvin Kamara, Michael Thomas, Rashid Shaheed, and not being able to score points at the NFL level of
55
football.
minutes of the game. Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
like I would love for the Bills to have even let alone Chris Olave, give me Rashid Shaheed and we'll
Shaheed would
make
be
him
tough on the Bills.
he would be amazing. But the Saints don't know how to scheme targets for anybody except for checkdowns, so they are the worst.
Yeah, the Saints offense is absolutely loaded with talent. And honestly, at times, the offense feels hard to watch. We understand that Derek Carr at this point in time is not the same Derek Carr that he once was. Not that he ever was this game-breaking quarterback outside of the 1 year before he broke his leg. But at this point in time, you know what you're getting with Derek Carr. And on top of it, this offensive line is not good. And he's really rushed out of the pocket. He's really running for his life. But here we are. We're here after Thursday Night Football. 31-24. Jacksonville wins the game over the Saints. And at a point in time, the Saints looked like they were about to mount the crazy comeback. I believe at one point in time it was 23-9. It was an ugly game. But the Saints fought. They kept driving. They kept being resilient. The defense started to get it together late into the game, where early on it was struggling to stop. Well, whether it was ETN or honestly just Trevor looking solid. He looked very good. And then there's a point where the Saints really locked in. But then the last couple of drives, the Jaguars were able to get it together. But you see the name of the title. The Jaguars are back. Now, that is pretty loose. But I say the Jaguars are back because this was a good to great defense that they're playing in the New Orleans Saints. And the offense was able to score points. They did have the pick six that definitely aided the score to get up to 31 points, but Etienne gets into the end zone twice. You look in the thumbnail. If you have Travis Etienne, you are looking at a potential league winner every single week. This guy is doing something special. He has a couple weeks where he's been out of the top 10. Outside of that, we're talking about a top 5 running back almost every single week, and I would not be surprised to see him in there again, where he goes 14 carries, 53 yards, 2 touchdowns, and this is against a great New Orleans Saints rush defense. But Alvin Kamara, if you have him in PPR leagues, even have PPR leagues, he was somehow able to outdo him, getting into 23 fantasy points, 17 carries. You're always going to get volume when it comes to Kamara. 62 yards, 12 receptions, 14 targets. And what's funny to me is 91 yards. I mean, he actually was effective and efficient with his touches today. Has the 2-point conversion as well. But let's stay on the Jaguars before we talk about Alvin Kamara. ETN, is it guaranteed at this point he's going to have a top 5 finish?
That's what it feels like right now. He scored 6 touchdowns in his last 3 games, right? In a game where, very strangely, Trevor Lawrence and his knee injury has a career high rushing 59 yards, because The Saints, for the most part, did a good job containing ETN. 14 carries for 53 yards. They did allow those 2 rushing touchdowns, but on a yard per carry basis, to hold ETN to under 4 for what he's been doing to start off the season, that feels like a W. It's just Trevor Lawrence went out there and rushed for nearly 60 yards and averaged over 7 yards per carry. Travis Etienne right now, though, this looks like the best Etienne we have seen, right? He looks, I don't want to say like a completely different running back from last season because he was still good last year, but it does feel like he has a bit of like a half gears up from last season, or maybe even a full gear up. The speed, the physicality, it all looks like it's come together. And now he's finally getting that full workload that I feel like we hadn't seen previously, right? Like we hadn't seen him get consistent 18 to 20 touches. And then once they brought in Tank Bigsby, it felt like this might be another year of ETN not being that workhorse back. But you go out and you see he got 17 touches today, 5 targets in the pass game, 14 carries. I mean, you got to feel great as an ETN owner right now.
Yeah, he coming into this game actually led the NFL in touches. So like obviously, I mean shit, Kamara probably caught him at this point. I'm half joking. Yeah. I'm pretty sure I saw Kamara leads all running backs in catches now after having not played up until week 4. It's insane.
I wish Derek Carr was my quarterback because I would make shit pop.
But yeah, I mean, ETN, like I was a little bit worried about him coming into the season because I was high on Tank Bigsby, and ETN, where he struggled last year, was converting short yardage carries, and that's where Tank was really, really effective in college. But like, it started like week 1, Bigsby was getting the short yardage work, and it was like, okay, ETN might have to score, from 10 plus yards out, and then that's kind of really disappeared. Tonight he scored from 2 yards out, and I believe the second one was from like 10, 11 yards out. But yeah, like you asked the question, Drew, about like, is he a guaranteed top 5? Like running back, I'm struggling to think of more than 3 running backs I'd rather have. Like McCaffrey healthy, yes. Yep. I think you still give Austin Eckler that respect. Agreed. Honestly, like until Devon A-Chain's back, Mostert's got to be top 5.
Has to be.
And then like Ken Walker probably is in that range as well with how he's played and the touchdowns he's scoring. But after that, I mean, like I mentioned, you said 17 touches tonight, was leading the NFL in touches coming into this week. And the targets, like he was not getting targeted in the passing game at all last year, which was something else I was worried about because you bring in Calvin Ridley. He's getting, like his target share has gone from like 7-8% to like 12% this season. So pretty much everything on top of what Joel was saying is that he's essentially the same player, which was a great player last season, and now there's more volume. So yeah, if you have ETN, like I wouldn't even consider trading him. I would just ride the wave.
Now let's talk about another member of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Well, let's talk about 2 of them, and it's going to be at the wide receiver position. We're going to talk about Captain Kirk, Christian Kirk, and we're going to talk about Calvin Ridley. Now, prior to the season, there was a little, let me say, there were strong discussions, not a little. There were strong discussions about who the wide receiver 1 would be in this offense. Now, Adam, we were talking before the show started. You had a comment about Calvin Ridley when he faces man coverage. And now when I came into this season, my thought process with this wide receiver position was, particularly with Jacksonville, was how are you just going to suddenly eliminate a guy from an offense that was 1,100 yards, had 7 touchdowns, was just a reception machine? How are you just going to completely take those targets away from him and transfer it over to a guy who hasn't played football in almost 2 years? That's where I sat, and that's where my thought process was, where, yeah, I get it. Calvin Ridley has an insane amount of talent, but it comes to a point where continuity trumps that when you haven't been in the game for such a long time. Now, we see it in multiple weeks outside of week 1. Trevor's most consistent go-to guy has been Christian Kirk up until this point in the season. We saw it again on full display today. Christian Kirk, 6 receptions on 6 receptions on 6 targets, had 90 yards, had a touchdown, did have the fumble. That's something I do want to note. But gets into the end zone. I mean, this guy has just been a model consistency. And you look at the opposite of Calvin Ridley, where we have games where he could be as great as a top 6 receiver in fantasy and then finishes as low as 76. For that to be the case, the lack of consistency with Calvin Ridley, I'm sorry, going forward, the wide receiver 1 on the Jacksonville Jaguars is Christian Kirk.
I don't think that's a crazy statement. I mean, we have now 7 weeks of sample size with Calvin Ridley. 3 times has he scored double-digit fantasy points, and one of those times was a 2-reception, 38 yards, and touchdown game. So you're really looking at 2 games where he legitimately put up like wide receiver 100-yard games. I think the biggest issue with Christian Kirk, and I agree with you, I think wide receiver 1 going forward for this Jaguars, I think the biggest issue for people coming into the season with Kirk was you have Calvin Ridley here. Zay Jones was getting hype in 2 receiver sets, so Christian Kirk felt like he might not play as much. And then it always felt like, and still kind of does to an extent, that Calvin Ridley's upside, like everyone always chases upside, especially in draft season. You want to get that guy who's going to break out and be top 5 or top 10. And Calvin Ridley always fit that mold. He was always the player who we've seen him have elite seasons in the past. He's coming off, not playing for a full season, really 2 seasons. But now he gets Trevor Lawrence. He gets this prime quarterback in the perfect place to make this huge MVP type jump to win the division, put up 4,000, 5,000 passing yards, 30 touchdowns. And everyone wanted to go and just grab the potential wide receiver 1 in probably the early 4th round. But then you have Christian Kirk, like you mentioned, Drew, who last year already proved it. Last year, he said, I got paid $72 million. I am not going to just disappear because you traded a 2nd, 3rd round pick for Calvin Ridley. I am still here. But everyone just overlooked it because Calvin Ridley was the new hotness. He was the one who is going in that 4th round that should be getting all of the targets. But right now, Christian Kirk is not going to give you those 0 weeks, those weeks of scoring 2 or 3 points. His floor right now is like wide receiver 24. I mean, week in and week out, outside of week 1, he is someone you could put in your lineup and absolutely guarantee a safe 10 points from. And then you could still have the games like tonight where he goes 6 for 90 and a touchdown and will probably end up as a top 15 or 12 wide receiver. So Kirk right now easily has the higher floor. And for Calvin Ridley, if the floor is going to be 1 reception for 5 yards, I don't really care what the ceiling is because it's just not worth it if he's going to lay an egg on my starting lineup.
Yeah, Calvin Ridley so far this season has really struggled against press man coverage. So I was worried about him coming into this game because that's pretty much all the Saints run, right? They have Lattimore, they play a ton of man. And the thing that I liked about Kirk, I wrote about it in the offseason. Over at FTN Fantasy, we have a bunch of awesome data. And something I wrote about when I was writing my Jacksonville preview in the offseason was that Christian Kirk was top 5 among wide receivers last year in routes and targets against linebackers. So like Doug Peterson, they did such a good job of getting him. First of all, he was among the league, the league leading receivers in pre-snap motion as well. So he's getting all these favorable matchups. And so far this season, I think he's 5th among, coming into this game, he was 5th among wideouts in snaps and pre-snap motion. Kind of reminds me, not to the same extent, of how in Miami, all of the scheme stuff is going to Tyreek Hill, and less so is going to Jalen Waddle. And again, not even close to the same level of talent, production, etc. But Ridley's kind of like the Jalen Waddle, where he's going to make some plays because of his talent. But Kirk's getting the screens, Kirk's getting the scheme touches, the jet sweeps, the end arounds, the catches in traffic, in traffic and crossing routes. And Ridley's kind of relying on back shoulder throws. And you mentioned that touchdown. I think it was in London. Like, it counts, but 2 of his touchdowns this year have come in absolute blown coverage, where it's just like you're lucky he scored. So yeah, like we have to kind of be reactionary week by week. But after week 1, I was worried about Kirk, but we also have to keep in mind Zay Jones has hardly played since then. So I am interested to see like if it goes back to Kirk just not being on the field as much in 2 wide sets. But yeah, I don't think it's reactionary to say you'd rather have, like when I did my rankings for this week, I had Ridley at closer to like wide receiver 30 and I had Kirk like closer to wide receiver 15. I thought there was a massive discrepancy. Ridley's still going to have some games, right? We expect this offense. I don't think this offense has even been as good as they could be. They've had some issues on 3rd down and stuff like that. But yeah, I just think all the scheme stuff and the more, I guess, predictable stuff is going to Christian Kirk right now.
And last thing I want to touch on with the Jaguars is Trevor Lawrence. We knew that he had this knee injury coming into the game. It was a question of whether or not he would play. Honestly, looked good to me. He had that run late in the game that honestly fantasy owners were absolutely loving. Being one of them, I needed that rush. And then he goes and he throws the touchdown to Christian Kirk, which honestly salvaged his fantasy day, finishes with 20 fantasy points. The first time this season, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that he has accumulated over 20 fantasy points, or at least 20 fantasy points, which is what he finished with today. this to me felt like a sign of better things to come. Looked great with his legs. That's something that obviously he showed last season as well. Passing wise, again, we haven't even seen the best of this offense. He only threw for 204 yards. And I feel like once Calvin Ridley starts to get really incorporated more on a consistent basis, we'll start to see the true ceiling of this pass offense. But I felt like it was great to see Trev still be mobile and try and get the job done with his legs.
Absolutely. And on the other side, you have this New Orleans Saints team, which feels like it's just going in the opposite direction. Derek Carr, 33 of 55, averaging 5 yards in attempts. I mean, this was, I know the score, right? It says 31-24. You're like, damn, 24 points for the Saints. Like, this is a good game. I think it was their first game scoring more than 20 or 21 points. But this was awful. This was ugly. I don't want the stat line, the 300 yards, got a touchdown. I don't want that to kind of make you think that this is a good game. They had 9 points at the end of the third quarter. 9 points at the end of the third quarter. They could not do anything, it felt like, for a majority of this game. And then towards the end, they ended up getting to the end zone a couple times. They made the score a bit closer than what I think the game was. But this offense right now, and they even said it on the broadcast, is when Derek Carr goes to drop back, you're typically going through read 1, read 2, read 3. It's not their check down. Derek Carr is going back. His first read's a check down. That's why you see Alvin Kamara with 14 targets, 12 receptions for 91 yards. Like, this offense, and Derek Carr, he did injure or tweak his groin. He came back in, but even before he got injured, it was just check down after check down after check down. And even Chris Olave, who got 15 targets, only holding 7 receptions, but only going for 57 yards, 8 yards a reception. Like, this is one of the best big play receivers. Yeah, one of the best big play receivers in the league, and they're not able to get him touches down the field and really show off that explosiveness. So you're looking at an offense where if they're not taking shots down the field, and it's just going to be Kamara check down, Kamara check down, Kamara check down, Kamara should be right in that group, in my opinion, with Travis Etienne in terms of league winner. In terms of guys you were getting the middle rounds, of course, he was dealing with suspension, but This is multiple games now of Kamara getting 10-plus targets, of getting these 7, 12 receptions. What, his first game back had 13 receptions. Like, he is putting up elite wide receiver numbers while giving you 60 yards rushing on the ground. Wasn't super efficient, 3.6 a carry, but he's practically an extra wide receiver out there at this point. So for the Saints, of course, you're starting Olave, you're starting Alvin Kamara. Kamara, I'm ecstatic about, but right now, Chris Olave has the numbers in terms of, like, he's got the 80 yards, he's got the 100 yards, but it feels like he's yet to have that big blow-up game where he could go for multiple touchdowns, where he could go for 150 yards, because I felt like there was times even in this game where Derek Carr missed him. I think the last player I just didn't mention was Michael Thomas, who got into the end zone, who salvaged his day, 3 for 42. And Rashid Shaheed, 8 targets, but 4 for 28. Another super explosive player who's not able to win down the field because of this offense.
Yo, Shaheed's nice.
He's really good.
He's
the touchdown that didn't catch, where he goes one-hands it, gets 1 foot in, like, he gets 2 feet in. We're talking about the best catch of the year, but he just couldn't get that second
fast.
Foot in. So fast.
The ball, and he's explosive.
He's so explosive. God damn. But yeah, this offense is ugly. The numbers, stat-wise, look great today, but in reality, it wasn't a pretty game for the Saints.
I want Jameis.
You want? Oh, I was wondering. I was like, what are you saying, Jameis? Yeah, Jameis Winston.
I want.
And I don't know. They just paid Derek Carr 150 mil. He's got a couple more weeks in him.
He's not taking shots down the field. It's obvious that either this shoulder's hindering what could be a big play, but even still, I just feel like he's saving it for particular moments.
He can't even throw fade routes. Like, he's coming up short on fade routes.
He was kind of freaking out on Olave on that deep ball. He's like, keep going. But you're right. He just lacks touch. He lacks finesse at this point. I don't know if he's trying to save, like I said, savor his arm for key moments and pick his spots. But it really, this offense lacks explosiveness. And another thing, maybe it's the play calling. I saw a tweet about this, and honestly, it's
Saints
true.
Fans want the OC fired by
where
tonight.
Where are the slants? Where are the quick plays for Michael Thomas, getting him easy plays? There's not a single one ran for him, really.
Week 1 I liked a lot because obviously Kamara wasn't there, so it's different. But they had Chris Olave line up in the backfield like 5 times, and there was 2 plays where he ran angle routes against linebackers and just absolutely cooked them.
Killed them.
And that is gone. Like, that has, like, obviously Kamara being there there's less, I guess, reliance on that. But, like, And even started like Olave's first target was like a kind of designed bubble screen where Thomas kicked out and blocked from. I was like, okay, it was 12 yards. Let's do more of that. And then the rest of it was just running routes down the field. And like, to be fair, like Jacksonville coming to this game, they were top 5 in terms of receptions allowed to running backs, and they play a ton of zone. So it kind of set up for a Kamara reception game. But, and as involved and as good as Kamara is in the passing game, your running back should not have 7 catches at halftime. Like, I'm sorry, but that should not be
with the offense. Yes.
should not be it should not be what your offense is based upon. So I like Olave is going to be on that, like, high end wide receiver 2, mid range wide receiver 2 borderline for most of the season. I do think if there is a switch to Jameis, he's going to have some of those weeks you've been talking about, Joel, where it's like 8 for 130 and 2, because like he's still getting open and making plays. It's just there's been a lot of stalled trips in the red zone, a lot of misconnections deep, and then like the obsession with the fade routes, I don't really understand.
Yeah, because I had someone sorry, Drew, I had some of my mentions today was like Chris Olave has been a bust for me. And I'm like 4 of his 6 weeks have been really good. It's like 100
he had that
yards,
stretch where he had like
190.
16 total yards in 2 games, but he scored in one of them. But yeah, he started the season really, really good.
But then you look and you're like, well, he was wide receiver 14, 35, 21, 33, 17. I'm like, well, I guess you're probably not wrong, right? You drafted him at the end of the 3rd-ish, and he's putting up like mid-tier wide receiver 2 numbers. So right now, Olave is just a better real-life player than fantasy.
And I'll also say this to wrap up on Saints offense conversations. I think at this point, you realize Jamal Williams was a safety blanket in case Alvin Kamara was suspended for longer than just 3 games, only gets 5 carries for 14 yards. At this point, I feel as if you could even drop him. If he's on your team, if you already aren't contemplating dropping him, this was a key game to show you, it was his first week off the IR, but just the amount of touches that Alvin Kamara is going to garnish on this offense, I feel comfortable enough to say Jamal Williams is droppable at this point. Now, moving on to the best part of the show. We're here for our starts and sits of week 7.
Should be fun this week.
You know
6 teams on a bye. Everybody's should be fun.
For sure. And we're going to go over those teams that you should not have players in your lineup for at the end of the starts and sits. But Mr. Dehls, talk to me. Who is your quarterback start of the week?
Going back to old reliable, had Kirk Cousins last week. Didn't work out well. This week, though, old reliable. Going with Brock Purdy going up against the Minnesota Vikings.
I love that.
Last week against Cleveland, it was ugly. You're having some talking on pick a side about, is he out the MVP race, this and that.
It got
at the end of the day, for fantasy football, he's still someone that I'm looking at as a back end QB1 type of play this week. Outside the Cleveland game and the Rams game, which he wasn't great, he has 4 games of QB 13 or higher with the QB 10 and QB 7 finish in there as well. And he's playing a Vikings team who has allowed the 9th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. And honestly, before this week, they were probably in the top 5 because you had Tyson Bagnet out there and when Justin Fields gets hurt. So their number got inflated a bit. So I know there's probably some people out there with the CMC injury, Debo, Trent Williams, all kind of dealing with these nagging injuries. Might be a little hesitant to start Brock Purdy this week, especially, last week you see him struggle immensely against Cleveland. But this is just a completely different situation, right? You're going into the week knowing that these guys are banged up. You're going into a matchup that's not the Cleveland Browns, a historic defense on the road. You're going up against Minnesota, which I believe is a away game, but in a dome, knowing that you might not have CMC or Debo Samuel, so you could at least prepare for that going into the week. So I'm more than happy starting Brock Purdy this week.
Go ahead, Adam. Give me your start of the week.
So I have 2. So I want to let you go first, Drew, in case that way I can pivot either way.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, man.
So my start of the week,
there's not a lot of options because we can't just be like start Josh Allen, start.
There really weren't great ones, but this one is more so of whether or not he's going to play, because obviously that is a huge concern. We understand that Deshaun Watson does have the shoulder injury. He was limited in practice today, but that's a great sign that he is practicing on the Thursday. He has a great matchup going up against the Colts. The Colts right now rank 23rd in terms of points allowed to the quarterback position. They're 3 points above league average in terms of quarterbacks given up to the quarterback position. Deshaun Watson, last time I believe we saw him was that Titans game. And that Titans game, he goes for 289 yards. He has multiple touchdowns. It was his best passing performance yet. And in a plus matchup versus the Colts, where Jacksonville hasn't been that same pass offense like we were expecting. And of course, Tennessee, the last two matchups that the Colts have had, these aren't prolific passing offenses, or let me not say the Jaguars, because they should be. They just aren't at this point in time. But Matthew Stafford throws for over 300 yards. We had C.J. Stroud throw for almost 400 yards against this offense. I'm fully expecting, if Deshaun Watson is healthy and ready to go, that he can take full advantage of this. And like the guys mentioned, there aren't many quarterback matchups that I'm really looking at and really just taking my eye off this one, where this is one of those matchups. It's more of a confidence boost. If you have Deshaun Watson, start him. Feel confident if he is going to play, that it's not going to hinder his performance. He has a plus matchup. He should do his thing against the Colts.
So I'm going to go Matthew Stafford. Can this guy just please get some sort of break in the touchdown department? Like, 2 touchdown passes were dropped last week. So right now he's at a 2.6% touchdown rate. Is 27th in the league. His career passing touchdown rate is almost 5%. So I think we're due for some regression. And he's playing at one of the best levels of quarterback in the league. It's just he's had, I think, all but one game he's had 1 or fewer touchdowns. It's just been really unlucky. There's been some huge Kyren Williams spike week performances. Obviously, the backfield is depleted right now. Like, I don't think they're going to come in and say, you know what, Zach Evans, Darrell Henderson, Myles Gaskin, we're going to rely on you guys. I think they just throw the ball a ton in this game. And Stafford, look, he's played as well as anybody. The Steelers are a really vulnerable pass defense. They're allowing 7.3 yards per attempt. That's the 10th worst. The second highest ADOT at almost 10 yards. And right now, the Rams are 13th in the league in red zone rush rate. I think that's just going to completely transform back to just them passing more, with Kyren Williams on IR for the next 4 weeks. Or not on IR, but he could be on IR. He's out this week for sure, though, and probably up until their bye. So I think this is a vintage Stafford game. He's due for one of those spike weeks where he has like 320 and 3. He's just been a little bit unlucky with the touchdown. So once that finally kicks in, I think we're going to be looking at a huge week from Stafford. He's at home. And yeah, as long as the pass rush can hold up, I think he's in for a huge game.
Who was your other quarterback start? Just curious.
It was Geno. He's been.
I was also looking at Geno.
Yeah, he's been definitely. He's come back down to earth a little bit. He had like multiple touchdown passes in like 13 games last year. He's only done it, I believe, once so far this season. Mm-hmm. But Arizona's they're just like the most chill defense. They sit back in zone. They're dead last in pressure rate. And Geno's last year, he destroyed zone coverage. This year, he's at like 80% completion rate. Obviously, hopefully DK can play. But still, they brought in JSN more last week coming off the bye. Lockett's healthy, mostly healthy. And they ran way more 3-wide sets last week, which is really exciting for Geno as well. So, yeah, Geno was definitely, if I didn't talk about Stafford, it would have been Geno.
All right, Joel, and before you go, I have to give my sit of the week, because ironically, it was your start of the week last week. It's got to be Kirk Cousins. And listen, you even spoke about it on the last show that we had. Going forward, you cannot feel confident in Kirk Cousins as your quarterback in fantasy football. Last week, finishing as the quarterback 24, only 9 fantasy points. And in a matchup versus San Francisco that allowed the third fewest points against fantasy quarterbacks, they've allowed one quarterback to throw for over 300 yards, and that was Matthew Stafford, which was a division game. And Matthew Stafford is gonna Matthew Stafford. We all understand that. But without Jettas, this offense lacks explosiveness, lacks that guy, obviously, because Jettas is so game-changing that now the attention is not being drawn to Jettas, where now Jordan Addison's now going to be seeing some real looks. You have TJ Hawkinson, who is one of the premier tight ends, but last week we thought would be a plus matchup going up against they played Chicago last week.
Chicago, yeah.
Yeah, that was a
little bit of wind in that game, but still.
That's also true, but at the same time, it's one of those matchups that you're just looking at and thinking, this is one that TJ should dominate. Really,
Drew, you know what time this game is on Monday too, right?
Prime time.
And Mr. Kirk
automatic
Cousins.
Bench.
And that's unfortunate that he's drawn that tag.
He did light up the Eagles on Thursday night this week, but
very
this
true.
Year, but
very true.
It's a different beast.
I've become a fan of Kirk Cousins, and I'm not ashamed to say that that's because of the Netflix special Quarterback. Just seeing his work ethic, seeing his drive, his passion for the game, it really just makes him such a likable individual that I can't root against Kirk. But without Jettas in this matchup versus San Fran, there's nothing boding for him right now.
Yeah, not great. He was, before I look at the doc, he was definitely gonna be up there. But another name that with all the buys, you might have to start him in two QB leagues, but I'm not excited to start Russ this week against Green Bay. To start the year, he was hot, multiple top 10 finishes, threw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. A couple times that Bears game sticks out. But these last two games, not as great. Against the Jets, he was definitely better for fantasy than real life, finishing quarterback 13. But less than 200 passing yards, had 2 passing touchdowns. But overall, wasn't a great game for Russell Wilson, especially in that second half where the Jets were really able to shut them down. Then last week against Kansas City, we knew it was ugly. Less than 100 passing yards, 2 interceptions. So this Broncos offense right now. Sorry?
Take it easy. I hear the rudeness in your voice.
I'm sorry. I'm just being honest. This Broncos offense right now, if you need to start Russell Wilson, you need one or two things. You need either multiple touchdowns or you need rushing. And to his defense, he's had multiple games of 50-plus rushing yards. So if he's giving you 5 to 6 points on the ground, that leaves some room for error in the passing game where he doesn't have to throw for 300 yards or 3 touchdowns to still have a decent fantasy day. He could have the 200 yards, 1 to 2 touchdowns, and still be a mid, probably QB2. But going up this week against the Packers, who are top 10 in terms of passing yards allowed, allowing the 9th fewest points to opposing fantasy quarterbacks, it feels like you're relying on Russell Wilson to get multiple touchdowns or to have that 50, 60-yard rushing game. And while he's able to do it, I still don't trust this Denver Broncos offense. I think they've shown these last 2 weeks that first month of the season was more so the opponents they face rather than the actual talent and scheme on their team. So right now, going up against really any defense that's within that top 10 to top 15, I'm probably staying away from Russ.
I don't have anything to add. Both quarterbacks you guys mentioned were pretty much the only ones I could even consider mentioning as sits because it's pretty bad elsewhere. I mean,
there's like 20 quarterbacks available this week, so if you're in a 2 QB league, you can do.
Yeah, if you're in a 2 QB league like I am right now, actually, I had Jimmy Garoppolo stashed for weeks, waiting for this one because I had Dak Prescott on bye. I was waiting to slot him in. I also have Jalen Hurts. It's a luxury, I know. But at the same time, I was ready to slot Jimmy in, and then he has the back injury, and now he's not playing. So now, since it is a super flex, I'm going to start Drake London because the options at quarterback are so limited right now. Our waiver wire is a Mac Jones, the Bears backup quarterback. Brian Hoyer, of course, is available. These aren't guys that I'm looking for. So I'm just going to run out a receiver for me just because I'm not trying to cut anyone. So if you feel like you need to do the same, don't be afraid to do so. It's never ideal. But if you're in that position, again, you got to do what you got to do. So let's move on to running backs.
We're in a 10-team league, so anyone out there, 12, 14-team league, God bless you.
I'm saying
week.
A prayer. If you're in a 12-team 2 QB league and you're not going quarterback in the first 2 rounds, you're out of your mind. That's just my personal opinion. But at the same time, let's move on to our running back starts and sits. Joel, we'll start with you. Give me your running back start of week 7, sir.
This is a guy I spent over $70 worth of fab on. This is also the first week I'm excited to start him. That's going to be Jerome Ford, running back for the Cleveland Browns.
Son of a bitch.
Was that yours?
It was both running back. I think you should start both, honestly.
Yeah, Kareem Hunt's also probably not a bad start either. He's been quietly pretty great in replacement of Nick Chubb. That game where Chubb got hurt, over 100 yards and a touchdown. The following week against Tennessee, he was RB7, had the 2 touchdowns. RB30 against Baltimore, not great. But then RB22 against San Francisco, where I felt like Jerome Ford was probably unstartable in that matchup, with PJ Walker starting. Had 17 carries for 84 yards, was super efficient. And He's really been efficient all season. He's 7th in yards after contact per attempt between CMC and Raheem Mostert have been arguably the 2 best running backs in football. He's 14th in missed tackles forced, tied for 7th in 10-plus yard rushes. And he's been doing this. I mentioned the schedule: Tennessee, Baltimore, San Francisco, the Pittsburgh game. He was great. He's doing this against, some of the top defenses, some of the top front sevens in the NFL. Now he's going up against the Colts team, who are top 10 in terms of allowing fantasy points to opposing running backs. They've allowed 2 or more rushing touchdowns in half their games this season, and at least 1 touchdown in 5 of 6 of their games this season. So they've been very beatable on the ground. Whether it's Deshaun Watson or Walker or whoever it is, I still feel comfortable starting Ford because we saw last week 17 carries. If he's going to get that type of workload, he's shown the efficiency, shown the ability to break tackles and make stuff happen when, things aren't perfectly set up for him. I'm very happy with Jerome Ford this week in my starting lineup.
Adam, would you like me to give my start while you think of another, or do you just want to continue and elaborate on what Joel said?
No, I mean you can go. I just want to add that the Colts are going to be without Grover Stewart too, who's
That's true. Just got
probably their
suspended
best
PED.
run stuffing D tackle, and Minshew, the way he looked last week, is probably going to give Cleveland's defense or offense, I guess, some short fields. So,
Yeah.
I think, and I almost might prefer Watson sits one more week because they went like massively run heavy last week, as you'd probably expect, but they'd probably do it again. So, like, even if Hunt, who did draw the started again, like they would run the ball enough to where they can both get 14 to 16 touches and be really effective. So,
All right, so my running back start of the week is going to be whichever running back starts against the Denver Broncos. Unfortunately, we're still the 32nd ranked rush defense
James
in
Robinson.
national football.
They just signed James Robinson. You put him out there.
No, I say that with the
Okay.
idea of AJ Dillon did get a primary. Just of course, he was the main back for the Packers against the Raiders prior to their bye week. But Aaron Jones has logged back-to-back practices, but limited. He still does carry the injury designation for the hamstring. But if Aaron Jones is out there, I keep saying AJ because of Aaron Jones, AJ Dillon. But if Aaron Jones is going to be on the field, of course, that's going to be one of the best finishes on the week. But I'm giving my vote of confidence for AJ Dillon if that's not the case. And even honestly, even still with Aaron Jones, this AJ is killing my brain. Even with Aaron Jones being on the field, I still believe that there is a piece that AJ Dillon can still get a great workload and still be fantasy relevant as a strong flex because of how much the Denver Broncos are giving up fantasy points. Of course, 2 touchdowns, the 5-touchdown game, but that's one that we don't have to talk about. Against the Jets, Brees Hall did a number on us. Pacheco didn't look that great against us, which was shocking. Honestly, we did a good job of stopping the run. It was the first time that we actually looked solid. But every week other than that, we have been gashed on the ground, and Aaron Jones is one of the premier backs, and A.J. Dillon did a great job in his replacement. Only this past game versus the Raiders, where he had 20 touches, did have 76 yards, did get into the end zone. So clearly, whoever's the back is going to be the workhorse, and either play is a strong one.
Absolutely. I love that.
yeah, and like even if Aaron Jones plays, like the fact that he's still limited after all this time is a little bit concerning. So
That
like
is concerning.
Dylan probably still gets like 10 plus touches, especially if they are playing with a lead. I'll go real quick, and this one definitely scares me, but I don't know how you're benching him at this point at this time. So Ramondre left last week's game with like he took like a really ugly hit where he like landed backwards and he looked out of it. He got checked for a head and ankle issue. Came back in. He missed most of the third quarter, but then came back in the fourth. He played every snap but 2 in the fourth quarter. Finished with a touchdown. Had 5 catches, so the work in the passing game was back. They have Buffalo this week. Buffalo's been like the most boom bust run defense in the league. Like if you they literally lead the NFL or are second in the NFL in percentage of runs that are stuffed at or behind the line of scrimmage. But at the same time, they also allow the second highest percentage of runs to gain 10 plus yards. So you're either getting like 10 plus yards against the Bills or you're getting stuffed. So there's obviously some boom bust there. But I just hope Ramondre still gets that work in the passing game. It's obviously, a good sign that he came back and is, he was limited, I believe, on Wednesday, but I believe he's off the injury report now. Zeke will still probably get his 7-8 touches, but when this team goes in the 2-minute drill, which they could be a lot in this game if they're trailing, if the Bills figure out how to score touchdowns in the first couple quarters, I think Ramondre not going to be to the level we thought we were getting, and we definitely saw last season, but I think he can still get 16 touches and get hopefully at least the work in the passing game.
Listen, for no personal reason at all, if you had to choose between two, Keontae Ingram or Ezekiel Elliott, who are you choosing?
What a choice.
So Ingram led the team in touches last week. DeMercado led the team in snaps, but that was because he was their primary third down running back, and they were behind. You would probably think they're behind again, but like Ingram got 12 touches.
Mm-hmm.
I would probably go Ingram just because we know what Zeke's role is with Ramondre there.
Yeah, I agree.
We're here.
Ingram has a chance if the game, if Arizona's played respectable enough to keep it close in Seattle for long enough for him to get 15 touches, right?
And
So
when they're in the game, their rush offense is solid. It's just a matter of staying in the game if the defense can hold up.
yeah, shout out
That
to all
was my
those. Real quick, just shout out to all those DeMercado bids.
Oh
were-
yeah.
It was
I
always
pivoted
improved.
very quickly when I realized
Spoiler
that.
alert: it's going to be the same result for Zach Evans, by the way.
You know what? I saw you tweet that, and before we move on to our running back sit, is he going to be your running back sit of the week?
Probably, yeah. I think he's a terrible start this week.
Why is that? I'm very curious because I know that
So-
he definitely was one of those that was bid on very highly.
Yeah, like I get it if you spend a lot of fab and you're just completely decimated at running back. You have Pollard on bye and all these teams on bye.
Yeah,
and
this
you
week
just
I have
lost-
Brees and
Right.
Derek Hall both on bye.
exactly. Like you have
Derek Hall,
Brees on
you know what I
bye,
mean.
you have
Derek Henry.
you have
My
Henry on
brain
bye,
is
you have Pollard on bye, you have
scrambled
Montgomery.
eggs.
Montgomery's now out, which sucks. But like, so my worry was Zach Evans. Admittedly, I was not a fan of his in college. I thought I didn't love him as a prospect. Obviously, they're bringing in all these veterans. Darrell Henderson's familiar with the offense. My concern is Zach Evans has like zero experience in pass pro. Kyron Williams, as good as he's been in fantasy, he is like borderline elite in pass pro. So he's obviously not there anymore. Well, he's there, but he won't play this week. I heard Sean McVay talking about Darrell Henderson's abilities in pass pro, how he loves him in pass pro. Guess what? You're going to have to be good in pass pro against TJ Watt. So I worry about that with Zach Evans. I'm not crazy about him as a prospect. I think multiple running backs play. Like I think a beat reporter straight up asked Sean McVay, like, do you expect Zach Evans to start this week? He said, I wouldn't say that yet.
Wow.
So that's concerning. And then like I said with Stafford, I think they just throw the shit out of the ball this week. So like, again, certain situations are different. Like if you picked up Zach Evans and you just have, like if you were deciding between Zach Evans and like, I don't know, like one of the Cardinals
Ingram?
yeah, like one of the Cardinals running backs, like there, I would go Ingram. But if it was like, I
God,
don't
that's
know.
making me feel amazing.
I
have
just
no
worry.
idea how good this makes me feel.
Again, I've been wrong many times, and maybe this is just like the
I
first
just
week of
needed
Zach
a vote
Evans
of confidence.
emerging.
That's all I needed. I need
Would
because
you-
I have Keontae starting with Jalen Warren because Brees and Derek are both on bye. I'm in
Yeah.
hell.
Yeah.
I mean,
Wait,
Jalen
is Zach
Warren,
Evans still your favorite in terms of Rams running backs? If you
at
had
the
to start
moment,
one, would it
yes,
still be
but
Zach?
it's not like it could
It's
change
just because you have
tomorrow.
to pick one.
Yeah, it could change tomorrow if we hear something. Like I wouldn't like. Would you be surprised if Darrell Henderson had 14 touches in this game?
No, not at all.
No, I wouldn't.
He likes
All
Darrell
right.
Henderson too. Like he was playing Darrell Henderson
Loves him.
over Akers for a while.
Yeah.
So
All right, Durag Deli, talk to me. Who is your running back sit of the week?
You're going with Kirk Cousins at quarterback. I'm going with Alexander Madison at running back.
we're
A lot of the
just
same
benching
options.
Every
Just
Viking.
bench everybody, unless your name is Jordan Addison or maybe TJ Hawkinson. Just bench everybody. We saw how ugly this offense was last week against Chicago Bears. Now they're doing a complete 180 going against Chicago to the San Francisco 49ers, top 3 defense in football. He being Alexander Madison 2.4 yards per carry against the Bears last week. 2.4 yards. He did have some action in the receiving game that made his fantasy day at least somewhat reliable. He was around 10 fantasy points. He scored a touchdown. That's really what did it. But now he's going up against the Niners defense, who before last week had not allowed more than 55 rushing yards in a single game. That goes to show you again to my start of the week how great Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt as well were. I think overall though, it's a sit Madison because it's a bad matchup, but it's just I don't think there's going to be many times this Vikings offense is even getting past midfield. Like without Jettas on this team, we saw how much they struggled. They are home this week. They are indoors in the dome. So maybe they're a little bit more comfortable there, but this is a San Francisco team that I'm sure is going into this matchup pissed off. They feel like they should have won last week. They just gave up, a season high 150, 70, whatever it was, rushing yards against the Cleveland Browns. Now they get to go and beat up on a Minnesota Vikings team who really have not looked that great all season long, missing their best weapon. So Alexander Madison, like we said, Drew starting Jalen Warren and Keontae Ingram this week. So if you're in that type of situation, I understand you need someone who's going to get 15 touches. But outside of that, he's someone I would look to have on my bench.
Okay, so my running back sit of the week, I didn't want to be basic and continue to keep drilling this guy, but I feel like I have no choice. And it's going to be Rachaad White, who might be victim of one of the worst fantasy football schedules that we've ever seen a running back have. And it also doesn't bode well with the fact of they don't have a great run blocking unit. And he's also just not that great of a rusher himself. Where he saves face is the fact that he's a solid pass catcher. But when it comes to rushing, he just has not done a great job outside of that game versus Chicago. And Chicago's been one that's just been extremely generous to almost every single running back, unless your name's Alexander Madison. But here we are. They're in a matchup versus the Atlanta Falcons. Right now, they're giving up the fourth fewest points to fantasy running backs. Last 3 weeks, they have not allowed a running back to go for over 70 yards. And that's with Travis Etienne and Dameon Pierce in those matchups. Brian Robinson hasn't been the best of late. Outside of that game versus Denver, again, who hasn't been good versus Denver, but he did not have that great or efficient of a game. Antonio Gibson was able to score a touchdown, but that was out of play action on the 1 yard line. What are you going to do about that? But the Falcons have been a great unit in terms of fewest yards allowed in the league. They are fourth right now in the National Football League. In terms of yards given up to the running back position, they are 11th, and that's being carried off week 1 versus Carolina, where Miles Sanders did have himself a ball game. So I'm very, very, pessimistic with starting Rachaad White like every week, honestly, unless the matchup is a home run. He's one of those that I don't want to say he's droppable, because no running back with that amount of opportunity you can drop. You can't feel good about it, but he's just not giving you any type of fantasy value. He hasn't given you double digits outside of the game versus Chicago. He's just not a guy that I love to have on my team. It was one of those guys that I was trying to stay away from prior to the season starting. Another guy that I really did contemplate putting forth was Jonathan Taylor going up against Cleveland, but I decided to refrain. I saw Baltimore put up a great performance up against them. I know that CMC, the game plan was to stop him. CMC was able to get into the end zone, but that was as a pass catcher, and he just made a CMC type move. But the defense shut down, and they've been shut down all season. They're the number 1 defense in football. And with the way that Gardner Minshew played football last week, if I'm Cleveland, I'm doing everything I can to stack the box and force Gardner Minshew to beat me. Jonathan Taylor, he will have better matchups, I think, in the next 2 weeks. I think in one of those, he has Carolina upcoming, whether that's next week or the week following. But this is not a matchup that I love. In the couple of games that we've seen Jonathan Taylor since coming back off the pub, they haven't been great. And owners that drafted him are probably punching themselves, me included. But trust, better days are to come. Unfortunately, I don't feel like this is the weekend that will be JT's blow up. Now let's go right into it. Let's go into our wide receiver starts and sits. Adam, we'll start with you with your wide receiver start, so that way none of us are stealing yours. It's only fair.
Yeah, I'm probably stealing one of yours, but I have 2. I have one that's a little more obvious, but then I have an interesting one that we'll talk about. But Amari Cooper was really impressed that he still got over 100 yards with, like, PJ Walker is if he starts, like, he's fine. Like, we've seen him, DJ Moore still had plenty of fantasy reliable games in Carolina with him under center. But you just look at the matchup. I mean, the Colts have been the premier spot for wide receivers this season. They're giving up 98 receiving yards per game to opposing number 1 wide receivers. That's the 7th most in the league. 7 different wide receivers have finished as at least a top 28 wideout against them. 6 have finished inside the top 20, and they've allowed 4 different receivers to eclipse 100 yards. So their secondary has no shot. And then deep leagues, a lot of teams on bye, a lot of players out. I'm starting this player in a league, so it's not just me, touting him and then not even backing it up. Darius Slayton, and I kind of hope Tyrod plays because of it. Tyrod is actually, and always has been, a pretty strong deep ball passer. We saw it. We connected on 2 deep passes with Slayton in Buffalo last week. Slayton's pretty much like Isaiah Hodgins, which is surprising given how good of a story he was last year. He's like not playing anymore. Like, Slayton was like 90% route participation last week. And Washington, they are the worst defense in the NFL at limiting deep passes. 6 passing touchdowns of 20-plus air yards, the most in the NFL. They allow the most passing yards on such passes in the NFL. Like, their secondary is so bad that, Emmanuel Forbes was their first-round pick. He doesn't even play for them. He's benched.
0 snaps last week.
Yeah, so I think he can still be fine if Daniel Jones does play, but I actually do prefer him if Tyrod's under center. And You could also throw Wanda Robinson into the mix here too. He's getting more of those scheme targets. He's got like a 22% target share since making his season debut a few weeks ago. So I would be as comfortable as you can be, I guess, starting both Giants receivers as more under the radar plays if you are in a pinch this week.
Yeah, Wandale had double-digit targets last week, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
so.
and he probably had 42 yards or something. His ADOT, he has the third lowest ADOT, I think, among receivers with 10 targets this season. So don't expect he's probably going to be like Michael Thomas, but maybe even more catches than we've seen from Thomas, like 6 for 50. And you'll take it and you'll move on and you'll take your 10, 11 points in PPR league and hope to kind of stay afloat.
All right, Joel, talk to me.
My start of the week, pairing with my quarterback, going with Brandon Ayuk going up against Minnesota. I got a lot of starts, a lot of sits in this game. If you can't get it by now, start everyone in San Francisco and sit everyone on Minnesota Vikings. But with
I'm starting
Debo and
Addison
CMC,
in a league, so.
Addison's probably fine.
I'm starting
Hawkinson's
Addison.
probably fine. But yeah, the rest of these guys, sit them down. But with Debo and CMC both going into this week a little bit questionable, a little bit banged up, I'm more confident that Ayuk should lead this team in terms of
Do you guys
the
think they
receiving
play,
game
by the
and
way?
targets. Say it again.
Do you think they play? I think McCaffrey
CMC
plays, and I think Debo's. We probably see decoy Debo again, which
that could be.
I think CMC.
terrifying.
I'm
leaning
leaning
towards
towards
no for
100%. No.
I'm leaning towards no. He's still not practicing. They probably don't need him in all
Who,
honesty.
CMC?
Against,
Well,
against
CMC 's one of those
Minnesota.
CMC
veterans.
doesn't practice on their
Yeah.
first day of the week, and today was technically the first day of the practice week
Okay,
since they play Monday.
They play Monday. Facts.
So I think it's CMC plays. I think Debo either plays or is in the decoy role again, which either way is great for Ayuk. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just curious because
Yeah, no, good.
I want to know the feel for that team this week.
Yeah, and obviously it sucks out on a Monday because maybe we know, but odds are we probably won't know until
Yeah.
Monday. So you're gonna have to make that decision. But Ayuk is someone I'm still very confident starting. Of course, he was. I feel like maybe a bit cooled off these last couple of weeks. Right, he got up to that super hot start week 1 against Pittsburgh, had a couple touchdowns, the 100 yards. But even in these quote unquote off weeks, he's putting up 58 and 76 yards. So the floor right there is very safe that he's not going to bottom out and give you this Calvin Ridley like game that we just saw, 1 reception for 5 yards. And we know the ceiling is there that, like in week 1, he could finish as a top 2 receiver for fantasy football. And the one area where I think he could really exploit is in man coverage. So last season, this is per Matt Harmon, he had a 77% success rate, which is near elite for Matt Harmon. And as of 2 weeks ago, I was trying to find the most recent number, but as of 2 weeks ago, the Vikings were bottom 10 in terms of yards allowed per target and man coverage. So Brandon Ayuk, with all the looks he's going to get, depending on Debo, if he's healthy, if he's not, same with CMC, he's still proven himself that this season he's leveled up. He's gone from that. He's the wide receiver 2 in this offense too. On any given week, he can be the number 1 option on this offense outside of CMC, and they can still be one of the most explosive teams in the league. So I love this matchup going up against Minnesota. It's a 44-point over-under, and it's like the 4th highest over-under of the week. It just shows you how ugly of a week of football we have ahead of us. But this is one of the few games where I trust this offense for the 49ers, and Ayuk should be able to eat.
Brandon Ayuk, we have data at FTN Data and FTN Fantasy on our. If you go to the player pages, you can see a bunch of awesome data. Brandon Ayuk against man coverage this season has a 32% target share.
God
That's
damn.
ridiculous.
He's so good. I'm starting to wonder if he's like. I think top 15 for him as just an overall talent at wide receiver is almost a lock at this point. He's so
Adam,
good.
did you happen to see our Would You Rather on Devonta Smith? Excuse me, on Brandon
Who's on
Ayuk,
Ayuk?
where
Who's on
it was
Ayuk, yeah.
correct. Or would you rather on Brandon Ayuk or no?
I might have.
All right, so I'll rattle you off the names that were in conversation. Obviously Devonta Smith.
You asked me this last year. I would take Smitty, but I'm taking Ayuk.
Amon-Ra St. Brown.
So you guys, I don't know if we were like kind of working with each other, but Amon-Ra was my favorite player in that entire draft class. So
Understandably so. He's a legend.
I thought he should have went in the second round. It was absurd.
And the fact that who's it? Diami Brown was taking over him. That's pretty crazy.
Who wasn't taking
lot
it?
of
That's
names.
very true. Very true. Well, three of them were justifiable.
Yeah, of
Jalen
course.
Waddle, Jamar Chase, Devonta
When I
Smith.
tell people he was my favorite receiver in that class, it doesn't mean I had him ahead of Chase. He was just my favorite. You know, I was like, you
Yeah.
always have favorite players in each class. Like he was undoubtedly at any position my favorite player in that draft class. So every time he does something, I feel great. So
Terry
yeah,
McLaurin was another one.
this one's so tough because like, can you imagine like Terry hasn't even been able to play with anybody as good as Brock Purdy. Whether you think Brock Purdy's a star, good, great, average, like
Some respect to Sam, please.
I like Sam Howell, but like
That's facts.
I don't know, man. It's tough to play the like quarterback game, but if you just watch both, like they're both really. I would probably slightly lean Ayuk, but I'm really high on Ayuk in general.
Is
so,
Ayuk better than T Higgins?
Yes.
All right. I see where your head's at.
Ayuk guy, love it.
I don't know
Because
if
I
can go
took
that
Smitty.
far.
I took Ayuk over Smitty too, and everyone said, "Oh my God, you fell off
No,
Smitty."
you changed. You changed. That's all that happened.
Ayuk's
You
just better.
changed.
Like, what am I
Brandon
supposed to
Ayuk
do?
has some of the best route/defender manipulation I've ever
Yes.
seen.
That's why, because I feel like everyone's
stupid.
first thing is Smitty's a better route runner. I'm like,
He's not.
I don't know. Like Ayuk,
not.
if it's right there, you might like have a little preference. Maybe he's.
I don't think there are 5 to
fluid,
6
but-
receivers better at running routes than Ayuk.
Yeah,
So-
Ayuk is
he's
pretty
in the
incredible
elite
at
tier.
running routes.
It's not just like his like change of direction. Well, it's definitely change of direction, but it's
He's
the
more
way he
explosive
sets
than
up.
Smitty.
Yeah, it's the way he sets up. Like you see a clip on Twitter every week about Brandon Ayuk making somebody turn this way
Looks
when he's
silly,
stopped
yeah.
5 yards ahead of him. So, yeah, Ayuk's unbelievable. And whether Debo plays or not, he's going to smash because I think Debo's probably limited if he plays.
Would you take Brandon Ayuk over Jalen Waddle?
I might. I don't.
I can't do that.
Big
I can't do
Ayuk
that.
guy. I would take.
I only bring that up because this is my wide receiver start of the week. Jalen Waddle going up against the Philadelphia Eagles. Philadelphia Eagles right now ranked 27th in terms of points allowed to the wide receiver. They're just not a good secondary at this point in time. Big play Slay, and of course James and Bradbury. These aren't guys at this point, which is shocking because they've been so good throughout their entire career. At this point, I do wonder if we're seeing the back end that this last season that we saw from them, their Super Bowl run was their last great year. They have not been good this year. Big play Slay. We know that we love Slay, but he's been giving up a bunch of yards so far this season. And Jalen Waddle, it's been seeming as if these last couple of games that we've seen from Miami, Tua's trying to force the ball to Waddle. There was a touchdown to Tyreek Hill, very blatant against the Carolina Panthers, wide open, no one near him. But he forces the throw to Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle gets into the
Oh,
end
is that
zone.
the play in the end zone?
Yes. And then the week before that, in the Giants game, there's a ball that is thrown to the left side of the end zone that Tua just overthrows Waddle, but it was a tough play regardless. Does not get the pass completed to him. And then the very next play forces a throw to Waddle in double coverage, and that's what allows the Giants to score their first touchdown in the first half. On the defensive side of the ball, that's when they scored their first touchdown. Pretty sad stuff. But regardless, it's seeming as if they're trying to get Waddle incorporated into this offense where right now he's wide receiver 40. He has not been that consistent last 2 weeks getting into the end zone. That's a great sign. But this is a matchup I'm fully anticipating that Jalen Waddle can take full advantage of, especially on primetime. We know Tua loves to show up in primetime. That's just what he does. But regardless of the fact that, of course, I'm only kidding, but I know that he is Mr. Primetime. That I'm being serious about.
Are you a fan of Tua, Drew?
That is my brother to the day I die. With that being said, Eagles are not a great secondary. Jalen Waddle is going to feast. And, of course, I can't choose Tyreek Hill, who most likely will be a top 2, top 3 receiver on the week. But Jalen Waddle, he will be in the upper echelon of receivers this week. I have no doubt.
I hope you're right, man. I'm waiting.
All right, let's move on to our wide receiver sits. I'll start us off. And I say I'll start us off because it brings me great sorrow to say this name. And I say sorrow because I love this guy, Cortland Sutton. And we're playing against Green Bay, and Green Bay has been pretty locked down right now, allowing the 9th fewest points to fantasy wide receivers. And it's just at the point in time where Cortland Sutton, unless he has a touchdown, there's no point in trusting what his floor can be. Because he's gotten to the end zone. That's one thing that we can give him credit for. He has multiple touchdowns this season. But go look at those games. Does he have over 40 yards? Does he have over 50 yards? The answer is no. And last week, he did get into the end zone against KC, but you saw a type of game where you have solid corners playing up against him. Sauce. Did DJ Reed play against us? I'm actually blanking off the top of my head.
I think he's. I don't know.
Even if he didn't, right? Let's say he didn't. A catch for 13 yards is the only output you're giving me. That's ridiculous. And Cortland Sutton going up against Green Bay, it's not an ideal matchup. You already had Russ as one of your sits. Green Bay secondary has been solid. It's not a matchup that I love, not by any means.
Yeah, I'll hop in here. My set of the week's gonna be Michael Pittman against the Cleveland Browns. Pittman's
I
actually
thought
been
about it, but
kind of a
anytime
dog
I
this
see
year.
Pittman as a sit, he goes
He
crazy.
eats, yeah. He's kind of been a dog this year. I feel like a lot of people were down on him because you have Anthony Richards coming in, who we were all expecting to, not be a great passer. While he had his moments, Pittman made the most out of his targets. But this week going up against Cleveland, I don't think I really have to explain how great this defense has been, allowing 200 total yards per game, the number one pass defense, top 5 in scoring, fewest points to opposing fantasy receivers. I mean, what they're doing to opposing offenses feels like it should be illegal. Like they're putting up numbers that like defenses in like the 70s and shit were putting up, just something you don't really see in the 2020s or in the 2010s. But their defense has been super elite. And Pittman was great last week, 9 receptions for over 100 yards. But that's going up against Jacksonville, right? And this is a little bit of a different situation going up against this Browns, the secondary, this cornerback room. It's a super elite group. And Gardner Minshew, I mentioned it on the last pick aside, he's number 2 in turnover-worthy plays, and he's played 2 games, right? Maybe 2.5 with Anthony Richardson's injury. But I think you mentioned, Adam, like they're going to get Cleveland going to get a ton of short fields. Gardner Minshew right now, he's hyped up as like one of the best backup quarterbacks in the league. While he has some talent, he just has way too many mistakes and way too many throws into tight coverages and double coverages and head scratching plays. So while that might be a good thing for Pittman, because if he's going to get some jump ball opportunities, he might be able to come down with a couple of them. Cleveland's defense has just showed that if you get in field goal range against us, you're taking that as a W. I don't have a lot of faith that they're going to be able to get into the red zone or even the end zone against them.
I'm going to go Josh Palmer. He's been good in the, believe it's 2 games now since Mike Williams has been out. He's run a route on 98% of dropbacks during that span, so he's just not coming off the field. But he's averaging almost 8 targets per game, about a 25% target share, so good production. I don't like this spot. The Chiefs have been unbelievable against wide receivers. L'Jarius Sneed is kind of emerging as one of the better perimeter DBs in the league, and he's shadowed this season. He's shadowed, I believe it's 6 times. We have like a shadow index tool at FTN Fantasy where it shows how often a player shadowed on what percentage of routes and what the production was. So like he shadowed Calvin Ridley in week 2, only had 32 yards against him. Shadowed DJ Moore, he caught 1 pass for 3 yards. Shadowed Garrett Wilson, 4 catches for 35 yards. Shadowed Justin Jefferson. Obviously, Jefferson didn't play the 4th quarter, but only had 2 catches for 14 yards. And then Jerry Jeudy didn't have a catch in his coverage last week. Like, he's been unbelievable. And Josh Palmer is probably not as good, well, definitely not as good as anybody on that list. So I think it's going to be, obviously, Keenan Allen's going to be heavily targeted, but I think it might be more of Austin Eckler in the passing game. Like, Palmer will still get looks, but I worry about how efficient he'll be. And overall, as a team, the Chiefs have been, top 8, I believe, against wide receivers in fantasy this season. So, again, like, he's been good, he's been productive, but I would temper expectations with Josh Palmer this week. And, like, this game's probably got the highest total. I wouldn't be surprised if this game was, like, 21-17. Yeah. Like, both these offenses have
Dallas.
been... Yeah, but exactly. Both these offenses have been underwhelming at times for a lot of the season. The Chiefs' defense is really good. They're at home. So I would not be surprised if this game went, a good bit under the implied total.
All right, let's just get right into our tight end starts and sits. Joel, let's start with you, brother. What is your tight end start?
An under the radar one, because honestly, it's either start one of the big guys, the Kelseys, the whoever else is, or go fishing on the waiver wire. This guy might be available. It's Luke Musgrave, rookie tight end for the Green Bay Packers. He got hurt in week 4, so I'm just going to throw that out. But in week 3, 8 targets, 6 receptions for 50 yards. Week 5, 7 targets, 6 receptions for 34 yards. And an offense that completes around 15 to 20 passes per game, if he's going to get 6 of those completions, you're taking that to the bank. And now you're going up against Denver, who has been the worst defense in football, regardless of position. Musgrave is a very athletic tight end. He actually had a higher athletic score than Sam Laporta, who looks like one of the most athletic tight ends, one of the best tight ends in the game, period, right now. So at 6'6", 250, he has the talent and the athletic ability to make big plays happen. We haven't seen it a ton so far this season, But the mix of targets he gets in this offense with the athletic profile, with his 6'6" stature in the red zone, I think you could do a lot worse than Luke Musgrave this week.
My tight end start of the week is going to be Mr. Dallas Goedert. I'm infatuated with this Philadelphia and Dolphins game. It's going to be offense galore. At least I'm hoping so. It's prime time. We don't have that great of a slate of games, but this is one of those that is it is already an early contention for me. That should be one of the best games of the season. That matchup is absolutely amazing of two powerhouse offenses. But Dallas Goedert in back-to-back weeks has had 9 targets and 8 targets. He had an absolute field day against the Rams where he finally had his blow-up day, had over 100 yards, did get into the end zone. This past week against the Jets, a Jets defense that has been one of the better defenses in the league, of course, 8 targets, 5 catches, 42 yards, didn't get into the end zone, so couldn't really cap off one of the better tight end days. But he's being incorporated into this offense. You're just not seeing the output. Going up against Miami, at this point, tight ends really, it's such a crapshoot that you try to find any matchup that you can. Right now, Miami ranks 20th in terms of fantasy points allowed to the tight end position. They've allowed 2 touchdowns. And Goddard is one of those that he's being featured so much in this offense that I fully anticipate that there is that he can get into the end zone, that he can have himself a ball game. And I know Smitty's coming off probably one of the worst games of his career, just to the sole fact of he dropped some balls that we don't normally see him drop. And so they're going to try and get him the ball just to get his confidence back. But I don't think that takes away from not just AJ, of course, but more importantly for this conversation, I'm talking about Dallas Goedert, who I think will be one of the better tight end plays this week.
And I'll go with Atlanta's top tight end, Jonnu Smith.
Jonnu Smith, love it.
Top tight end, it's gross. It's so true, but it's so gross.
Look, they're pretty much utilizing Drake London as the wide receiver 1, Kyle Pitts as the wide receiver 2, and Jonnu Smith as the tight end, right? Like, because Kyle Pitts is playing out wide 25% of the time, in the slot 62% of the time, and then Jonnu's playing more between in line and in the slot. But both were productive last week. Like, if you play tight end for the Falcons, you're getting the football. They're targeting tight ends 38% of the time. It's the highest rate in the league. It's not even close. The next highest is like 30%. And look, he's being targeted on 22% of his routes. It's the 5th highest rate among tight ends. Tampa Bay has not been great against tight ends. They did a good job against Sam Laporta last week, but I think especially with, again, the way this week is kind of shaping up, I think Jonnu Smith and Kyle Pitts, obviously, are both top 12 tight ends. It's still kind of new for a lot of people that are just starting to realize it, but like Jonnu Smith is pretty much a high-end tight end too the rest of the season, at least right now. I mean, he's got familiarity with Arthur Smith, who continues to utilize him a lot, and they're just throwing to their tight ends every single other play. So I think both can have a similar game. I don't know if both score, but they could both catch 4 or 5 passes. And it's not like Kyle Pitts. Like, Kyle Pitts, despite the production lately, his playing time has actually come down the last couple weeks. So Jonnu Smith's still going to be heavily involved, and the matchup's good enough. So, again, all these teams on bye. I think Jonnu is probably right there with Michael Mayer, who we didn't talk about, is probably the best player you could pick up and potentially stream this week.
Yeah, I was thinking about Mayer too, but the quarterback situation worried me a bit.
Yeah. The usage, though, is so, like, go pick him up because the usage last week was super encouraging.
All right, listen, Adam, we'll stay with you. Who's your tight end sit of the week? I know that tight end scarce. You don't feel great. I'll be honest with you. A play
I would
that
say, like, I don't want to play the Bills tight ends. Like, I'm still sick about
Kincaid,
the usage from Dalton Kincaid. He's going to play this week. He's, like, I'm not saying they missed him the last 2 weeks, but, like, they clearly need somebody in the middle of the field. But I don't know. Like, it's just they need something else. They're going back to the ways of just relying on Josh and Steph to be otherworldly football players, which they are most of the time. But when they're not, like, I think Diggs had like 11 of Allen's first like 16 pass attempts go his way last week. It's like, I understand he's one of the best players in the world, but they need something else. I think at some point this season, Kincaid could be like a low end tight end one, but I don't want to start anybody from Buffalo's tight end room right now. I hope I'm wrong, but man, it is tough to be a Bills fan and watch what Sam Laporta is doing when Dalton Kincaid was traded up for in the first round.
We just had this conversation on the Patreon talking about when is Dalton Kincaid going to have his breakout. Is this the game versus the Patriots where the
I
Patriots
thought it was the
defense?
Jacksonville game, wasn't
That's
it?
another one. That's another one where we're just all waiting for the game to happen. You drafted this guy in the first round. Where are the targets? Where are the plays for this guy? I get it. You mentioned, Stephon Diggs is one of the best in the game, one of the best that we'll ever see. Honestly, he's that great of a football player. But you got other guys. You brought in these guys for a reason. Start to utilize them. Now,
Got to give Latavius Murray 14 carries when you have the opportunity.
yeah,
to.
that's what's absolutely
pass that
killing
up.
me. Also, it's just like, can you please respect James?
I actually
Cook
like, as a
and the
Bills fan,
damn
like I get
rock?
attached to players when they do well. Latavius has actually been quietly like really, really solid this year, especially
He
in pass
has.
pro. But I thought something was a little bit odd when he started the game and stayed in for the first couple snaps. I was like, this is a little different. And then
It had me wondering if James Cook was hurt or not. But also, what was I going to say? Latavius Murray was great with the Broncos, so I'm not surprised that he's over here doing his thing for you guys. But my tight end sit of the week, it's not one that I feel great about. Obviously, would never sit this guy. It's just more so of I don't love the play, and that's my brother in Christ. I'm talking about my brother Samuel Laporta, and Samuel Laporta is going up against the Baltimore Ravens right now. They're the best defense in terms of defending against the tight end. They've allowed the fewest amount of points to fantasy tight ends. And last week, he was limited in that game. So going into this week, where he's also limited in practice, going up against one of the best defenses in football, it's not a matchup that I love. And more importantly, this is probably for daily fantasy, because, of course, in tight end leagues, you're starting Sam Laporta. You kind of are left with no choice. But Sam Laporta, who has been a superstar in fantasy football, a superstar in real life, honestly, he's been historic for a rookie tight end, period. I don't love the play, particularly when you're matching up against a Roquan Smith, who's one of the better coverage linebackers in football.
I will agree that Roquan is amazing, but can I just say that these are the tight ends the Ravens have faced this season?
No, it's no
Dalton Schultz, Irv
Yeah.
Smith, Kylan Granson. I believe David Njoku played that week. Frymouth, I don't believe, did play. So you're looking at Darnell Washington. And then last week was in London, it was Okonkwo. So they have not played anybody really that good. But it doesn't matter, like you mentioned. You're just kind of you're more of the like temper expectations for Laporta, who
for sure, especially with the injury designation. Seemed
yeah,
like they were.
I
kinda
traded him
taking it
away
easy
last week. So like
For what?
Oh,
it was a package deal. I acquired a Christian McCaffrey.
Oh, not bad.
I traded Laporta, Ken Walker, and DJ Moore for McCaffrey, Darren Waller, and I believe the defenses were thrown in. So
So
had
who
like,
was it? Laporta. Who?
I have a really deep bench too. So I traded Laporta, Ken
This is
Walker.
redraft, I'm assuming.
Yeah, Laporta, Ken Walker, and DJ Moore. I got back McCaffrey, Darren Waller, and like the Chiefs defense or something.
Oh, that's a W.
Which, yeah, I mean, didn't love McCaffrey getting hurt. The
Not
week I
ideal.
traded for him,
Not ideal.
but I picked up Elijah Mitchell, so like I should be good at least, if regardless, to good enough. We didn't talk about Elijah Mitchell. Like I think Elijah Mitchell could be really, really good, even though Jordan Mason was like Elijah Mitchell just got to stay healthy. So
Yeah, I
That's always
mean,
been his
Shanahan
issue.
loves him. Shanahan,
Yeah.
like he said it last year, like it was not a surprise. If you have a chance to get CMC, you get CMC. But like Elijah Mitchell was that dude. Like he was the
Yeah.
workhorse in that offense.
he's good in the passing game too. So like I think it's probably like 60-40 if McCaffrey sits, but like they should be able to, like their offense is not going to be as good obviously, but they should still put up 20 plus points.
I mean, you're not.
I mean, all they do is put up
Cleveland
30 when
Browns
Purdy
every
plays.
week.
Okay.
So
I was gonna
Yeah.
say, they put up 30 every week.
That's very true. Joel, who's your tight end sit, bro?
It's a player I hate. I paid him all year. Pat Frymouth.
Is it going to be for Frymouth?
Can you
good
how-
matchup.
He's played in 4 games this year. How many games does he have more than 10 receiving yards?
I'm gonna say 0.
3.
1.
Okay, I knew it was 1 or
It's
0. I just didn't know if it was
game
which one.
with more than 10 receiving yards.
Oh, that was
That
the
was the
Raiders
Raiders.
game. That was
The
the
Raiders
Raiders
game.
game. Yeah.
Yep. I don't think it's a Fryer. Like I think it's Pittsburgh's offense more than anything. He's more talented than 1 game of more than 10 receiving yards. But coming back from the injury, he just has to prove it for me to.
What if I told you
for me to
Matt
put him in my
Canada
lineup.
solved the offense in the bye week?
Oh, I'm sure he did. I have a cure for cancer too.
Listen, Deontay Johnson, another one. God bless. He's back. For all those guys that drafted Deontay, and I'm saying this so excitedly because you understand, I'm an owner of Deontay. I was so high on him.
I got a 4-2 team
Coming
that
into
just
the
gets him back
season.
this week. I'm hyped.
Yeah, that's lit. I mean, he was one of the most targeted last season without scoring a touchdown. On top of that, too, that just combination does not make any sense. He was due, and then he goes down with this hamstring injury, and it sucked. But now he's back. He's ready to go. He's logged another full practice. That is some great news. Mr. Dehls, do we want to do injuries, or is it just one of those? There's so many bye weeks. Let's
Yeah, I think like the only one, obviously, we're paying attention to CMC, but we probably won't
Montgomery
know.
out, obviously.
Montgomery's out. It looks like Jahmyr Gibbs is trending towards playing. Practice the last couple of days. We know Jimmy G's out. We know Justin Fields will be out. Roshan Johnson is actually probably named to pay attention to because it's 2 weeks now, concussion protocol. He hasn't practiced these last 2 days. So if you picked up Deontay Foreman last week, he's probably another person or another start that you could have for this upcoming week. Daniel Jones with a neck injury still feels like it's unlikely he will play. Drew mentioned Aaron Jones, who is dealing with that hamstring injury, limited in practice. So as long as he's limited again Friday, I think he should be good to go.
I would keep an eye on
Murray's,
Metcalf too.
DK, right? Yeah,
I think he legitimately could miss.
What's he dealing with?
I know he had the rib issue for like a couple weeks now. Then something else popped up when he was out of practice as well. I'll pull it up in a second, but yeah, I think it's multiple things with him.
The other name to look out for is Kyler Murray, who we know was activated in terms of like the practice window. So he was a full participant in practice Wednesday. It seems like he could play as early as next week. So, I mean, I feel like everyone knows at this point it's probably a bit too late to go out there and get a Marquise Brown or something. But maybe if you have like a sneaky Michael Wilson on the waiver wire or
Trey
something
McBride
like that,
took over the starting role last week.
Trey McBride's a great
shout out to
too.
Charles. I got to give a shout out to Big Chuck because he's been talking to me about Trey McBride for
years.
what seems like moons.
Yeah.
Do you think any team out there like real life would want to trade for Zach Ertz? Because if that's the case, like before the trade deadline, like Trey McBride could be like a top 12 guy.
He's not horrible. One of those last ride
10-1.
type players.
Oh, you 100%
Go back
should
to
be,
Philly,
yeah.
maybe.
I
Okay, last question
more
before we go.
Need?
Asking for a friend. Would you start Hollywood Brown against Seattle or Zay Flowers versus Detroit?
That's so tough because Zay Flowers, so I'm a huge fan of pre-snap motion. Like I think the more you run pre-snap motion, the higher chances scheme touches are going your way. Obviously not to the extent of, Miami with Tyreek and stuff like that, but Zay Flowers has been towards the top of the league in that. Hollywood, though, I think has double-digit targets in 4 of his last 5. Seattle's they've been bad against receivers, but they've also been better as of late because Devon Witherspoon's been unbelievable. He's playing mostly in the slot, though, so you're probably going to see a lot of Woolen. But then you also, I feel like a lot of times, we saw it with, Richard Sherman a lot. A lot of, the huge physical DBs struggle against kind of the smaller wide receivers, so I wouldn't be surprised if that... Damn. I'm going to be thinking about this tomorrow and signing my team. I might have to get back to you on Twitter. I
have Zay in my lineup right now, but I could go either way.
That's unbelievable. Is it full PPR?
Half.
Of course it is. That's so tough.
Because I love both. Honestly, I love both matchups. It's it's not like it's an ugly start. So it's I want to start both of these guys.
And it's not like one's getting 8 targets, 9 targets per game, and the other receiver's getting 4. They're both getting 7, 8, 9 targets every week.
So let's
Drew,
get into
do you have one or another? Sorry, before you go.
Oh, my one. No, mine was. Oh, you're talking. You're asking me my opinion.
Do you lean one way? Yes.
My feelings on.
I actually want to check my rankings because I don't even remember who's higher.
He's been super consistent this season and been the reliable option for Josh Dobbs. Now, on the adverse side, we start to finally see Zay Flowers really get incorporated into this offense, really seem to take over reins of the wide receiver one. And so I really want to say I lean with Zay for upside purposes because you're really going with floor with Hollywood. That is really your play with Hollywood. What's the safer option? It's probably Hollywood, but if you want that big play potential, I know you're going up against one of the better teams in our league also. I think I lean Zay.
I have Hollywood higher.
How many spots?
3.
Okay.
But I didn't talk about it. I could have mentioned Gus Edwards as a sit. The Lions' run defense is so good that I think
It's
the
incredible.
weird thing with Baltimore too is like Zay's been doing this, and we haven't even seen them become this pass-heavy offense we expected them to be in the preseason. They're still number one in the NFL in neutral script rush rate. Like, damn. Right now, I would lean Hollywood, but
Here we go. All right. Well, looks like it's gonna go down to the wire.
Well, I apologize, Joel. Listen, take my opinion with a grain of salt. But let's get into a couple questions and then we'll wrap up the show. I know it's almost 1:30, but let's be gentlemen here. All right. First question comes from DB Too Easy. He says, which three of these four should I start? Watson, London, Flowers, and Addison.
Okay, so you got Watson
London-
going up against Denver. I
Denver.
mean, Christian Watson, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Drake London.
London versus Tampa Bay,
Tampa
Flowers
Bay.
versus Lions, and Addison versus San Fran. I like
I like
Zay.
Flowers. I like Watson.
London
comes down-
versus Tampa Bay.
it comes down to London and Watson for me.
Of who you're leaving out, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, Addison, you have to because Kirk Cousins is Kirk Cousins. He's going to get the ball to his number one guy, regardless of who it is. I think Addison
Sounds like
isn't
it depends if you need upside or floor. Like if you need the upside play, I'd probably go with Christian Watson, who could rip off a 70-yard touchdown. But if you need the floor play, Drake London's probably the better move.
Yeah,
The
last
thing is,
2 weeks-
Atlanta's actually been they've actually been they're like 16th in pass rate in neutral game scripts since week 2. Like they're actually not playing this like 1970 style football as much, and they've actually thrown the ball like 37 times per game the last like 5, which has been like let alone 40 times. Like, but 37 is huge for Drake London.
Yeah, it's been getting me going because I have London in so many leagues, but it's been exciting to see these last 2 weeks that they're actually. I
agree with Joel. Like, if you need a massive ceiling and you are like you're not the favorite and you're chasing points potentially, especially after tonight, I would probably go Watson, hope he connects on a screen or a deep ball. But like otherwise, I don't think Watson, like, he had that huge play last week. Obviously, I don't like playing the game of take the huge play away, but like he does not get massive target volume like he didn't last year, and they have more and they spread the ball around even more this year. And Aaron Jones is probably going to play, so I would actually probably right now lean London, Flowers, and Addison.
All right, I'm with you. All right, BXD Wine says, for my flex position, should I start Terry or Deontay Johnson?
Starting Deontay first week back is bold choice.
Yeah, not great. I have Deontay. I can tell you he's still in my IR spot. I'm utilizing it. I want to see what I have week 1 off the injury, and then we adjust accordingly. Terry going up against the Giants. Giants last 3 weeks sneakily have been a good defense. They really have been. But you start Terry. You have no choice. You have to trust your guys. And Terry, he's still leading the team in targets. He's got to be your play there.
Yeah,
and Jahan Dotson's holding kicks.
So. Don't do this. Don't do this.
That shit was crazy. That shit was so crazy.
Ron the Goat says, Pacheco, Stevenson, Hollywood, or Gabe Davis in my flex full PPR.
I'm not benching Pacheco.
Yeah, you can't. You can't
going
bench
against the
Pacheco
Chargers
at this point in time. No way.
I like that.
I was wrong about him too. I didn't like him coming into the season, but he has dominated the percentage of the carries the last like 5 weeks, and he's even getting like he's still only playing like 11% of third downs, but like he's getting targets when he's on the field because these wide receivers, other than Rashee Rice, just can't get targets. So you're seeing more of these like 4 or 5 target games from him despite not playing third downs.
J4 says, help. Bench 1, Ford, Ramondre, or Rashee Rice. I guess you have to sit Rashee in this situation. But Rashee against the Chargers, not a bad matchup by any means.
It's a sexy matchup.
He's so difficult because he literally, I believe, I don't know if he qualifies just yet, but he's probably close to qualifying. But he's been targeted on 32.8% of his routes. It's like up there with Adams and Tyreek. It's insane. The problem is his routes and his snaps and everything vary each week. Justin Watson's out, but they added Mecole Hardman. I don't know how much he plays. Obviously, he could easily play in this offense in a short week or whatever. But like, if you told me Rashee Rice was like playing 90% of the snaps and running a route on 80% of dropbacks, it would be a lot closer. But
you're probably looking at a top 24 type receiver.
You're looking at what everybody hopes Sky Moore would be. But with the volatility right now, I think you have to bench him still. But he's like an elite stash. Like I would try to make sure he's on as many rosters as possible if he's out there.
All right. The owner Sam, we're going to answer only, let's say 2-3 more max. The owner Sam's, Flex Addison or Scary Terry? Addison vibes through the roof. Can't say he's wrong. Addison's vibes are through the roof. Going up against the Niners, I still think I lean Terry. Maybe I sound like I'm on Terry right now. Giants again, they've played solid, but you got to go with your guys sometimes.
It's close.
It's tough.
I think I would also lean Terry, but I'm also not scared to play Addison. Like San Fran's like bottom
Agreed.
5 in receptions allowed to wide receivers, mostly because you can't do anything else. You can't run on them. You have Fred to just eliminate any tight end. So I like Addison, but I feel the only thing I'm worried about with Terry is like we've seen this a couple times where he gets a ton of targets and is heavily involved, and then they go back to throwing to their tight ends 30% of the time. But I think he had the first target of the game for them last week, and then he had 3 on the first drive, which was really encouraging. So I'll slightly lean Terry as well. The matchup's really good. The Giants secondary is really, really inexperienced outside of Adoree Jackson.
Deontay's been a problem.
He's okay.
He's been solid. I think he has the second most. What is it? Let me not say breakups. Something between him and Spoon. Spoon has one more than him. Maybe it is past breakups, but he's really been solid this year.
Yeah.
Let's answer this last one and then we'll get out of here just because it's so insane the position that this guy's in.
Yes.
Rolly says, do I start Tyrod in Superflex? My other options are Trey Palmer and David Njoku.
If Tyrod starts, you start him in
Tyrod.
Superflex. Like easy, very easy.
I want to know who, like, are you in like a 14-man league? I feel like you
Has
could find
to
a
be.
waiver wire option that's better than Trey Palmer. David
And he
Njoku,
followed up
but-
that comment with saying, no joke, I'm in an awful spot. It sounds
sounds like it. It sounds like
sounds like it.
Listen,
Tyrod.
Tyrod, I'm a huge Tyrod fan. If he starts this week, I'm gonna have
could
some
be-
interest. I'm gonna have
He
some
could be
interest.
quarterback 18 very easily.
Yeah, going up against Washington, that's an all-day matchup.
The
that's
Giants
gonna-
haven't scored an offensive touchdown in like almost 40 drives now. It's
I was going to
insane.
say it's been since the Cardinals game. They haven't scored an
Goddamn.
offensive drive since.
That's
But
too.
and they
that's
were
gonna
1
do it.
yard short twice against Buffalo.
Yeah, no, that game versus Buffalo was not one that I enjoyed watching.
I didn't
back
either.
At all.
I didn't enjoy it either.
I had to watch it back because like I said, I fell asleep. I was not interested in the game at all. But of course, I had to do my due diligence because everyone was telling me Tyrod Taylor outperformed Daniel Jones all season long. It's the best that any Giants quarterback has looked. So I needed to make sure that was false claims. But again, that's going to do it from us over here at the Fantasy Reaction, episode 14. If you guys like what you listened to, leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already subscribed. Adam, as always, we appreciate you stopping in. Is there anything that you want to shout out before you go?
No, I always enjoy chatting with you guys. And if you're looking for some more fantasy content, articles, tools, DFS stuff, season long for football, but then basketball we're starting. I'm going to be doing basketball content as well. Check out ftnfantasy.com. And yeah, I'm ready for week 8. I mean, I already faced Kamara and ETN, so it's been.
Yeah, listen, sometimes you got to know when you lost a matchup, and it's
I didn't though. Like
it's
I had DJ Moore, the Washington game, and I lost that matchup. So like it's far from over.
Okay, I like to hear that. So again, guys, we'll talk to you guys next time. Probably have Adam on in the future. You get acquainted. He's gonna probably be a regular here. But that's gonna do it from us over here, and we'll catch you.